Good morning and welcome to What's New in DNA Testing to Prove Lineage. I'm Glenda Mikesell from the Minnesota Daughters of the American Revolution, and I'm the State Organizing Secretary. And I'd like to start out by thanking the Beltrami County Historical Society and Gary Rosman. I think we have a friend for life, at least I hope we do. And it's just been a delight to meet all you people here this morning, and it's been so fun and you've been so warm and welcoming. We do have some other friends here with us. I'd like to introduce our good friend and driver, Dan Latham, Diane's husband. He can talk to you about Sons of the Revolution or Mayflower. And we have Laura Gallup working hard in the back there. She's the Minnesota chairman for genealogical records. Then of course we have Diane. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Diane. More than I ever thought I needed to know, but oh my goodness, what a lady. Diane holds a BA in History and Political Science from the University of Illinois, Urbana, and a JD from William Mitchell College of Law. Professionally, she is a retired Medtronic patent attorney. Diane has done conventional genealogical research for over 40 years. She began genetic genealogy in 2004 when she became a volunteer DNA surname administrator for both the Plunkett and the Lampert surname groups for Family Tree DNA, the largest genetic genealogy testing service in the world. She is a member of the Alden Kindred of America, which is part of the Mayflower group, if you might remember John. They call themselves AKA, and it's not because their pictures are on post office walls. As well as the AKA's recipient of the Genealogist's Award. She is also a member of the Mayflower Society. As a daughter of the American Revolution, she is the Minnesota State Society Vice Regent. We call our president and vice presidents regents. And she's a past state corresponding secretary, the past Minnesota State Society Lineage Research co-chair, an NSDAR trained volunteer field genealogist, as well as a past Monument Chapter DAR regent and registrar. Other professional associations include having served as the president of the Minnesota Intellectual Property Law Association, as well as the chair of the Minnesota State Bar Association Computer Law Section. She is also a past chair of the City of Edina Energy and Environment Commission. Diane.
So thank you, Glenda, for the kind introduction. And I also want to thank Shelley Pullman from the Anthony Wayne chapter, who's doing the videotaping of this program. It will be ultimately posted on the public YouTube site for the Minnesota State Society of DAR if you have any friends who missed it. So DNA is becoming a frequently used tool for breaking down brick walls and discovering information that has been lost to the paper trail. What we're going to be talking about today are the different kinds of DNA tests and what a genetic genealogist can learn from them. And I'm going to demonstrate my own family's case study so that you could see, for example, what I learned from it. And I'm going to give you tips on how to get the most out of your DNA test, and then talk about new tools for the genetic genealogist, new things at ftdna.com, the new service of GEDmatch, Dr. Tyrone Bowes' process to identify a homeland, and finally, Prometheus, which you can get medical information from. Okay, the minimum for DNA testing, usually the tests run from $99 to $300, but there's a sale on right now at most services for the holidays. So it's a great idea to give a Christmas present to your father that you've been wanting to DNA test, for example. So now the tests are running more like $50 to $150. So between now and the end of the year is a great time to order a test. In order to order a test, you must have an email address that can be posted. Otherwise, you simply cannot do the DNA testing because they don't pass out any paper documents. Everything is online, so you've got to have email and you've got to have sufficient skills to be able to navigate a DNA vendor's website. You must be willing to post your lineage, and that's called a GEDCOM, or your ancestor surname, so that people who match you can understand how they match. For mtDNA, everyone has to be at least 13 years of age, and if you are 13 to 18, you have to have parental or guardian consent. The first thing we're going to talk about are the definitions. Your genome is your entire set of chromosomes. All humans have 23, and they come in pairs except the 23rd chromosome, which is the X and Y chromosome. On that one, if you have two X's, it's a daughter that is born. An X and a Y is a son. And this is very important because it's that Y chromosome that allows us to do the best genetic genealogy testing. And we're going to talk in greater detail about that. The basis for DNA testing, both men and women have mitochondria in their cells, which is called mtDNA, but only women pass it to their children. So it's passed in the female line without a father's influence. Sons can't pass it. So this is how we test the matrilineal line, which is your mother's 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 line. Only men have a Y chromosome, and that tracks the patrilineal line, your father's father's father. Now, everyone has autosomes, that's chromosomes 1 to 22, and that is, in essence, testing all of your lines, at least those lines that you got the DNA from, but it's only good to about the 4th great-grandparent. Whereas the Y chromosome and the mtDNA, that goes back indefinitely. What can you test with your DNA? Women, when they test the matrilineal line, your mother's mother's mother, and men can test both the patrilineal line, father's father's father, and their mother's 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 line. And then everyone can test the autosomes. So you've got to keep separate what types of DNA you can test based on what your sex is, and based on how far back you need to be able to go. And the reasons that people test, well, most likely to get beyond a brick wall, but you can also determine a geographic location for further research. It enables adoptees to unite with their biological families, and I've seen a lot of adoptees get reunited. And you can verify oral tradition. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but in every audience I have at least one person who comes up afterwards and says, I have an oral tradition of an Indian prince or an Indian princess in my family. Can I prove that I have any Native American heritage? Yes, you can with this. Or they might say, I have oral tradition that we have a Jewish person in the family. Yes, these DNA groups are very identifiable, and quite often with DNA testing you can find that out. And also you do it to verify a paper trail. I once had a gal in my audience indicate, well, she was practically back to Adam and Eve. What does she need this for? She's done so much research. I said, well, you want to find out if your research is right or not. Many people get a big surprise to find out that maybe they don't all have the same father among their siblings. There are all sorts of family secrets that crop out, and we'll be talking about some of those that I've come across. And then other people, they're just interested in science and they want to go on a DNA fishing expedition. They don't know that they're looking for anything in particular. They're just kind of curious how this all works, and so they take a test. And what you learn from testing your matrilineal line, you see that's the line in red going up the right. That's your mother's 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 line. And you can have daughters. How often have we in our research for American Revolution or Mayflower find oh, this man had multiple wives. Which child is the son or daughter of which mother? And so this would help you determine that. And you can prove that a female child was adopted or the result of a non-paternity event. Non-paternity event, NPE, is the euphemism for illegitimate. You could prove that women of unknown parents or uncertain birth names or siblings, and you can confirm a matrilineal lineage indicated by documentation. Which raises a good issue here. We have all these lineage societies with documents proving supposedly who the parents are, but then once you start DNA testing, you might find out that the documentation you have on file with DAR or Mayflower is wrong, and the person is not actually the child of that father. Well, what would these societies likely do? We actually have some of that currently, where a patriot is redlined. They don't dismiss that person from the society. They don't throw them out. They just don't let anybody else come in that line under that person. So my guess is that's what DAR or Mayflower would do should they find out by DNA that the documentation is incorrect. Next, what can you learn from testing your patrilineal line? You can assign sons of different fathers to the correct father, prove a male child was adopted or the result of a non-paternity event, prove men of unknown parents and uncertain birth names were siblings. And just because two people have a different surname doesn't mean they aren't siblings. We found some of that too. Confirm patrilineal lineage indicated by documentation. Okay, our major test services, and these are the largest test services. There are other services, but I focus on these because for the genetic genealogist, they have the most people already tested, and your object is to get as many matches as possible. So the first one is mtDNA.com. This is the only service that offers the only large service that offers Y-DNA and mtDNA testing. All three of these, ftDNA, Ancestry, and 23andMe, all offer the autosomal testing. Now, if you want to do DNA testing for DAR, they will only accept, well, they recommend, shall I put it that way, ftDNA.com. You could theoretically use a service other than that, but you have to make sure that they're doing the same kind of test that ftDNA.com is doing. And I am a surname administrator, volunteer, and so is my husband, for ftDNA.com. Okay, other services that you might use are GEDmatch. That's a free service, and you can upload your autosomal results from any test service. And what's interesting about this is the police have finally realized that this is a great way to solve cold cases. And I'd been talking to them about this for some years, and they always poo-pooed it. Well, now they're finding they can't actually solve cases, so they upload the autosomal results of the perpetrators. And then to find out who they match, build out the tree and identify the perpetrator. So we'll probably be talking about that a little bit later. And it's a free service. It's run by two retired gentlemen. And I thought, you know, there's no free lunch. What are they actually doing here? Is it just that they're beta testing on us and they're going to sell their product to a big company and make $1 million? No, when I read about their life story, these are just two retired guys doing something that's interesting for them and trying to help the public in making matches. They're very sincere about that. Okay, the next service is Prometheus, and although you can test with 23andMe to get medical results, this is cheaper. It's free. It's the right price. And you get more data out of it than you would 23andMe. You don't get any matches. You just get your medical information. And I'll be talking about this a little bit more later. And then African Ancestry, if you want to prove that, that is a great service. Here's what the sample test kit for mtDNA looks like. This is a swab test. You'll see there's two little toothbrush-like devices, and you wait till at least an hour after you ate, and you swab. I recommend at least 50 times on one cheek, and you put that in the vial. It snaps off, and you put it in the first vial. Then you swab the other cheek, I would say 50 times. Don't do it so hard that you draw blood. It's okay if you draw blood. That's not going to hurt your sample. My father worked a little too hard on his. But you want to be sure you get enough. I had an uncle, he was in his 80s, and maybe he just wanted to be quick and did a few swabs. I don't know what he did. If you're paying for their test, be sure you go and watch them do it and make sure they do it correctly and get enough swab there. Because what happens with mtDNA, your results are maintained for 25 years in their freezer. So if the person dies, you can continue testing them if you are listed as a beneficiary of theirs at mtDNA. So my uncle passed away, and I wanted to do the latest new test, and there wasn't enough sample there to run a second test on it. Usually you can get about 4 tests or more out of this, but if they don't do a good sample, you might only get 1. Okay, for a premium, mtDNA can test other things: toothbrushes, hearing aids, nail clipping, postage stamps. Hair is trickier. You got to be sure and get the follicle. And what was happening in a funeral, over-the-top genealogists were going in and trying to get a few hair samples from the deceased. So now the mortuaries will take the samples for you so that you don't have to do this unseemly practice. Also, cigarette butts and drinking cups. Watch out if you're in a restaurant and as you're leaving you see somebody wearing gloves, come up and grab your cup. Another over-the-top genealogist. You can exhume bodies, but that would be very costly. For Miles Standish, a Mayflower passenger, they wanted to go into his crypt, exhume the body, and then you could definitively tell who his descendants are. However, when they found out it was going to cost them $20,000, they thought, well, maybe they will try other methods. It's too expensive. Okay. Who's likely to agree to do a DNA test? Genealogists, you don't have to ask them twice. Individuals with a science background, they'll always be interested in this. But other than those 2 categories of people, I find people are very reluctant to test. If you're willing to pay for their test, okay, they'll go along with it. But otherwise, they don't understand the DNA technology. They don't know why you want it. They're afraid something bad is going to be learned from it or whatever. So focus on genealogists and individuals in your family that have a science background or plan to pay for it. Now, mtDNA will support a group getting someone's test results by having each surname group has a pot of money that anybody in their group can donate to. So, for example, in my Plunkett group, there was a particular person that we wanted tested, so everybody threw money in the pot, and then that money was used to pay for their test. So that's a way of underwriting tests in the surname group. Okay, why did I start DNA testing? What you have before you is the Four Courts Public Records Office in Ireland in 1922. This is the first example of records being stored in the cloud. All that smoke are 1,000 years of Irish history. What happened during the Irish Civil War, the IRA was barricaded in there and the English were firing at it, and they decided, oh, the best place to store our ammunition is in this public records office because it has the thickest walls of any building downtown. Well, after the ceasefire, the office blew up, and the question is, was it booby-trapped and somebody accidentally tripped it, or did the English bomb it? They don't really know, but the records are all gone. As a result, per capita, Irish are the highest testers of DNA on the planet. And well, my records only go back to 1800 at best, and that's the case with just about everybody in Ireland. So we frequently do test. Now, the question in your family is who to test. It's very important you get the right person targeted, otherwise you're not going to get what you need to know. So this top line, going up the top, that's the patrilineal line. That's my father's father's father. So if I'm trying to prove something in that line, I need to get my father to test, or if your father is deceased, you get your brother to test, because that Y DNA is inherited exactly, with mutations occasionally, through this line. And the ideal for a genetic genealogist would be, you see here, I've got my 8 great-grandparents, to have a male of that surname in each line tested. That would be the ideal for genetic genealogy. Now, you don't always have a male in the line that you want tested, or at least not one that's willing to test. And so then you have to turn to autosomal DNA or mtDNA. But the best DNA is that Y DNA if you can find a male of the surname for the line that you want to test. Now, if I want to test my mother's line, I could do that with my own mtDNA, and that's the line going down across the bottom. Now, let's say I want to test my mother's father's line. You'll notice that's the Lampert line there on the bottom half. For that, I got my uncle to test. He was of the surname Lampert. I had him over for dinner. Oh, dear Uncle Len, you have wonderful specimen DNA here. We wish to preserve this for posterity. Won't you please allow us to test you? Oh, well, they're very flattered. And, well, yes, niece, you can have my DNA. And then I did the same thing with my Smith line. I invited my third cousin over. He is of the surname Smith. Had him for dinner. I showed this show for him. Oh, well, that looks like a very useful tool. He was interested in genealogy, so voila, I got my Smith line tested. But you aren't always that fortunate, and so you might have to deal with some of the other DNA, but the Y DNA is the best. DAR recognizes that, and right now that's the only DNA that they will accept. I'll talk a little bit later about some other possibilities for DAR, but right now it's only Y DNA. Okay, mtDNA does offer the Y DNA test, and it normally is $169. It is on sale now for $99 until the end of the year. So it's a great Christmas present for some male in your family, whoever's lineage you would like to test and preserve. And you can, the 37 marker test will generally answer all your questions. You don't have to get the more expensive tests. 67 markers is now on sale for $179, 111 markers for $219. As a surname administrator for the Plunkett and Lampert groups, when I find a specific problem that I want to zero in on, I might ask somebody to take a higher level test. But usually you can get the job done with 37 markers, and unless your surname administrator tells you to upgrade, don't bother. Now, I have some people that are just curious. Well, hey, I want to do it. Okay, you've got the money, fine, do it. But you don't need it to solve whatever question we're looking at right now. I mean, I'm honest with them. But some people just want to try it because they're interested. The Y mutation rate. This is why the Y test is better than the others. It mutates on average about every 500 years. So by counting up the mutations, you can tell how distantly related you are to someone. But everybody's family is different. My family is a family of mutants. I cannot explain why, but since my third great-grandfather, we have racked up 3 mutations. This is extraordinary. You're only supposed to have 1 in every 500 years. Anyway, we've got 3 mutations, but because I have tested my brother, my second, my third, and my 4th cousins, I know exactly where those mutations occurred. Whether it was in my great-grandfather, my second great-grandfather, I know I've mapped it out. Now, my husband, he comes from a very stable family. They have 0 mutations, and he matched up with somebody in Denmark, and they only have built out their family trees back to 1750, so they don't know exactly how they're related. It's back farther, but there's no mutation in either of those lines. But they do know that their ancestors from 1750 come from the same towns that are 10 miles apart. So somebody got together there in a generation or 2 back. So what I'm saying, some people like my husband's very stable, no mutations. Others like my family are mutating like crazy. I don't know if mutations are good or bad. Maybe you'll decide that after you hear the end of this show. I don't know. Okay, so now one of the things that you're looking for when you're matching with people is that 90% of the markers match. So for a 37 marker test, you want them to not have more than 4 or 5 mismatches. 6 would be a very, you'd exclude the relationship because it's not in a genealogical time frame. A genealogical time frame is considered those years for which a paper trail is available. So for Ireland, that only goes back to about 1800 because of all the records that were blown up. A genealogical time frame for Iceland, however, goes back 1,000 records. They've never been invaded. Nobody ever destroyed their records. No religious warfare. Their genealogical time frame is much longer. Okay, the matrilineal test, that is now on sale from $199 to $139. And if you've got questions about, okay, who was the mother of which child, this is a great way to try to do that. It generally doesn't bring matches within a genealogical time frame. That's because mtDNA very rarely mutates. It doesn't mutate in thousands of years. Well, ladies, we know we're much more stable than the men, right? So it does not mutate. But because it doesn't mutate, you can get 100% match and not have a common ancestor for 2,000 years. Occasionally, however, there are mutations and you can get that match within 125 years, but that's about as good as it gets. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that it is a useless method for DNA testing, and we have linked up adoptees using the mtDNA. It just depends on the person. DNA testing is very specific to the person, what you're trying to learn, and what you've got available to you to test, what kind of people. Okay, the Family Finder, the autosomal DNA, is $99, now reduced to $49. That is a great price. And anytime Ancestry or 23andMe put on the sale for the $49 price, mtDNA has to immediately drop their price. So now for the holiday, that is great. So with this, you can do certainty, determine who your siblings, half-siblings. You can determine paternity. Oh, I was very glad to learn that my father is my father. My husband was so happy to learn, yes, his mother is his mother. That all checked out. You can identify nearly all second cousins, 90% of third cousins, half of fourth cousins, but only a few fifth cousins. So it's a good test, but it only goes so far. And that's because the DNA recombines with every generation. So if you take a deck of cards, 2 decks, shuffle them together, cut those decks, get 2 more decks of cards, shuffle those together, cut those. Now recombine the decks that have been cut with each other, keep shuffling and cutting, bringing in more decks. By the time you're done, how many cards do you have from any of that original deck? Not many. And so that's what happens with the autosomal DNA. It falls away. However, many of us are descendants of Mayflower and Patriots. They didn't have many people around to choose to marry, and they intermarried. As a result, the DNA got back into the family line. It was brought back in. And so I have gotten matches with people who are 8th cousins because they are Aldens and they all intermarried. And when I go visit a town that my Alden people are from, just about everybody I run into is some kind of cousin. And in this audience, I have an Alden cousin who has identified herself. So that DNA then keeps coming back in. So you will sometimes get matches with 5th or more cousins because of that. Next, other useful tests. You might have heard of the Genographic Project, Geno 2.0. The problem with Geno 2.0, it doesn't give you any matches, but it does give you a good ethnicity test. And I think it's one of the better ethnicity tests because National Geographic has made a point to going around the world and sampling different populations. When you test with mtDNA, 70% are North American, 70%. When you test with 23andMe, it's about 90% because they will ship a test overseas. Ancestry won't ship a test overseas. So about 100% of Ancestry is North American. And so, you know, you've got a very limited population that you are testing with. And if you've got a unique ethnic group, you're not going to get any matches in these test services because they don't have those people in them. Okay. The problem with Geno 2 is it doesn't tell you when you have a negative match or if the location was untested. So sometimes you're not getting matches at a particular location, but it's because it's not in the Geno panel of tests. They just don't tell you what happened there. So and that's one drawback. Okay, the testing for medical information, the Y-DNA is junk DNA. And by that, we mean it does not control any function in the human body that we know of today. And the reason they choose junk DNA is because if you're choosing DNA that gives an organism an advantage, that organism is going to proliferate and you'll get disproportionate numbers of them. Or if they inherit a trait that causes them to die off, you're not going to get very many of those people in the population. So they've chosen Y-DNA because it's junk DNA. So you don't have to worry about giving up medical information with a Y-DNA test that we know of today. Okay, if you do an mtDNA test, there is medical information in that, not a lot. It's medical information related to the functioning of the mitochondria. If you have an autosomal test, that is all your medical information is encoded in there. And it will tell whether you have the breast cancer gene, for example. It has told me that I am not immune to norovirus, just many, many things. So you want to be careful who you share that with. The autosomal DNA does contain all your medical information. Okay, we do have a Genetic Non-Discrimination Act. You're not supposed to be able to discriminate against people based on their genetics. However, it doesn't cover life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care insurance. Well, why would you not want that included? And so I inquired about that, and they said, well, we couldn't get it passed unless we excluded those. Well, those are pretty huge loopholes. But anyway, we do have a law on the books. Okay, as I indicated, the Y DNA is more useful for genetic genealogy. Autosomal is useful for generations 5 through 7 and very occasionally up to 10 generations. Exclusion from that would be the Jewish people, because they intermarried so heavily. They would get matches farther up the tree than others would because of that. Okay, now a very interesting book that I recommend reading. One of the pages of your handouts contains an extensive list of reading for DNA purposes. And this book by Brian Sykes, it shows that 7 women populated 95% of Western Europe. And the way they discovered this, they had something called a golden hamster, a hamster with a golden coat. And when they started doing DNA testing, they found that all the golden hamsters were descendants of the same female hamster that came out of Iran or something like that. So they thought, well, I wonder if that applies to humans. So they started testing women, and they found out, they're calling it the 7 daughters of Eve. Actually, they did not all live at the same time. But they're the 7 women for whom DNA survived in Western Europe. The rest, either the lines had only sons and died out, or they were just killed off. And my particular ancestor is the line for H, the haplogroup H, which is Helena. And she single-handedly populated 40% of Western Europe. So I have a lot of relatives on that line, and she was a busy woman. And any of Brian Sykes' books are so interestingly written that if you see Sykes as an author, just read it. You will be very much entertained, and you'll learn something too. And now, this next series of handouts or slides you do not have in your handouts. It is what I learned in my personal search for DNA. So it really only applies to my family, but it gives you an idea of what you could do. So in the 1950s, my family read an article in the magazine about the Meathlouth Plunketts. And they had this castle, Dunsany Castle. At one time, they had 15 landed branches. Across the road from this castle is another one, Castle Colleen. The Plunketts had that also. And my gosh, gee, wouldn't anyone like to be related to people with castles? So my father and I went to visit Dunsany Castle, and unannounced, we walked up and we knocked on the door. And Lord Dunsany, the 19th Lord, they have lived there since the 1400s, he's the 19th Lord. And we said, hi, we're Plunketts, we would like to visit. And he looked at us very carefully, and he looked at our noses, and he said, ah, the Plunkett nose, yes, you must be related, come in. So he showed us around many wonderful antiques back to the 1700s and before, and we had tea with him. It was a most wonderful meeting, and we visited several times since, and they really treated us very lovely. So I wanted to prove that we're related to these people, so I got my father, a second, a third, and a fourth cousin DNA tested. And another reason that we wanted to prove we're related is St. Oliver Plunkett is one of the Meathlouth Plunketts. He is Ireland's only canonized saint. St. Patrick is not an Irishman. He doesn't count. The only canonized saint is St. Oliver. Now, St. Oliver met a tragic end. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered by the British. That is his head you see sitting there. In the process of hang drawing and quartering, you dismember the corpse and you throw the pieces into the fire. The nuns grabbed the head out and saved it at the convent, and it is now on display as a relic in the church of Drogheda. And so my dad and I went to see this holy relic. Actually, I would like the Catholic Church to allow me to borrow a tooth and grab some DNA, but I don't think the Catholic Church will let me do that. So we inspected very carefully, and my dad looked at the upper lip and said, aha, a short upper lip just like Uncle Hugh. Surely we are related. Okay, so that's what caused me to start the Plunkett Surname group in about 2004. And then once you put yourself up on this site, I have a public web page that people can look at. Other Plunketts started coming forward. Yes, I would like to test too and find this out. So we got 37 men of the surname Plunkett and 11 who matched them but did not have the surname Plunkett. And we had a big test, and we came up with 10 genetically unrelated groups, completely unrelated. Uh-oh, which one is my family going to be? Well, 14 of them matched each other. It was a plurality, and they had a paper trail going back to County Meath, just a few miles from Dunsany Castle. So probably this is the Meath Louth group. But then there was another group, Niall of the Nine Hostages. He was a king reputed to live in northwest Ireland who had only sons and sired a good chunk of northwest Ireland. And people thought, well, it was just a myth or something. Then they started doing DNA testing. Uh-oh, 19% of northwest Ireland is sired by the same man, living in the exact area where Niall was said to have lived. So, okay, that's another group. That can't be the Plunketts. That's a whole other group. Then there's the Western Atlantic modal haplotype, which is very prevalent. 3 members were in that. That's not the Plunketts. Then there's the Maguires. There were 4 Maguires. Uh-oh, they're obviously not Meath Louth Plunketts. Wrong name. Clan Calla had 2 members. McBee had 2 members. G haplotype, they are the ancient Neolithic farmers who were in Ireland before glaciation. Then we've got the I haplotype. These are Northern European Viking. And County Wicklow Plunketts, we had 1. And then we had a very common haplotype, M269. That's the only way I can characterize it. So now, drum roll, which Plunkett did I turn out to be? Uh-oh, I'm not a Plunkett at all. I'm a Maguire. And all my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th cousins are Maguires. That means at least my 3rd great-grandfather was a Maguire, and probably farther back than that. So Dunsany is not the right castle. But we still have a castle. Don't worry, I told my family. The correct castle are the Maguires at Enniskillen Castle. Now it turns out my 3rd great-grandparents came from a little town, Temple, which is 10 miles from this castle. And my father and I toured this castle. It is now a museum. We didn't realize that that was our castle. Okay, so we had some disappointment in our family, and to this day, some of my relatives do not believe this. That DNA is hogwash. No, we're the Meath Louth Plunketts. No, sorry folks, we aren't. Our DNA doesn't lie. Okay, so to prove it, I got one of the Maguires to test, and the closest Maguire that we match, my Plunketts are only off on 3 markers. That's it. So and what I had to do is figure out where the mutations were in my family, not use those for the test. I have 1 4th cousin who is unmutated, and he was the one that we compared with the Maguires. He's only off on 3. Yeah, no kidding, we're Maguires. Then you come down here at these other 10 groups of Plunketts. Meath Louth were off on 17. You get way down to the Neolithic farmers were off on 45. You say, how can you be off on 45? There's only 37 markers. You can be off on 2 or 3 or more steps on the same marker, and it all counts as a mutation. So Neolithic farmers, no, they're off by a couple of millennia. So, sorry family. Okay, it's the wrong crest. There's less than a 1% chance that we're related to the Meath Louth Plunketts in 600 years. Wrong crest, but don't worry, we've still got a crest. We were just flying the wrong colors. In my family, we've got rings with a Plunkett crest, we got rugs, we got shirts, we got dinnerware. Oh well. This is what you can learn from DNA testing. It doesn't always take you where you thought you wanted to go, but you just have to accept it and move on. Okay, so now, how did this happen? Well, there are several ways it can happen. 4% of all births in any generation are illegitimate, not the parent expected, NPE. And that compounds over the centuries that we have anybody in the DAR records that is who they say they are. You know, this is a big issue. Okay, you can have adoption of a male child or remarriage of a parent. You can have surname adoption, and this is what I suspect happened in my family. And I'm going to loop back to this to explain what I think happened. Okay, other surname adoption scenarios, if you worked on the manor, you took the name of the lord of the manor, and sometimes he actually was the father. A widow who remarries sometimes changed the name of her children to the deceased husband. If a man marries into a more powerful family, he would take her name. This could have happened here. A woman having an out-of-wedlock child sometimes passed the child off as her mother's child. Changing a surname for political reasons, that's what I think happened here, and I'll show you why in a bit. Okay, so could there be illegitimacy? Yes, that's always a possibility, but the Meathlouth Plunketts lived in Southern Ireland, and my particular group were North Ireland and Temple. It's possible, but not so likely. But now we're going to take a look at the map of the 1400s, and if you look at the top right-hand corner, you see that's the Maguires. Look right underneath that, you see that yellow group, that's the Plunketts. And you see that there's just a hop, skip, and a jump between where the Maguires were living and the Plunketts in the 1400s. So you certainly could have had a non-paternity event there. They didn't have to go very far to accomplish that. But more likely, what I think happened, in 1607, you had the defeat of the Gaelic Earls. They fled to France. The Maguires left. However, not all Maguires left. You might have been a younger son who didn't fight, and you don't have any dog in the fight, so why would they come after you? Well, they see the name Maguire, they might want to exterminate you. So you would change your name so that you could have better prospects. And what happened, we've got a DAR member in the Stillwater chapter, and she came to me and said, you know, I think I'm a Meathlouth Plunkett. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm real interested. So she showed me her lineage, and yeah, it looks right. And the Catherine Plunkett is who she is descendant of. And the autosomal tests find my Plunketts matching people who have this particular Catherine Plunkett. So what it looks like to me, after the Maguires fled, one of the boys decided to change his name to Auntie or Grandma Plunkett, who was actually a relative, but not his surname, not the Y-DNA that he carried. So I think it's a case of changing your surname so that you would fare better, and that this happened in the 1600s. But you never know. It could be anything. Okay, so when your surname doesn't match your Y-DNA, and boy, this sure does happen. I had someone in my surname group, and there were people living in 2 counties by that surname next to each other, and he wanted to prove that they were related. And they sent in their DNA, and it didn't match. But I said, you know, maybe one or the other of you's got a lot of mutations that is throwing this. So have you got a 4th cousin that I can test to see what the mutations might be? He says, no, but I got a 1st cousin. I said, 1st cousin's going to be identical to you. I don't want a 1st cousin. You're wasting your money. He says, no, I want my 1st cousin tested. Okay, it's your money. The 1st cousin test comes back and he's not related. He's not related at all. Not related. And it's obvious who he is related to, however, because he has a ton of matches with this other surname. I said, tell me, was Grandma living next to anybody who had this surname? Yes. the next door neighbors were of this surname. They were very good friends of the family. I said, yes, indeed, they were good friends. However, I said, now look, you're the one who paid for this test, and so I'm giving you the results. Unless that person that was tested asks me what these results mean, I'm under no obligation to tell him anything. But if he does think of contacting me, I will, of course, tell him the correct interpretation. So this person who was tested had no idea what the DNA was all about. He never did ask. And the fellow who paid for it said, well, I think I'll mention this maybe at the next family reunion. I don't know what he did. But, and when I find people also who don't match up like that, I'll say, hey, go look in the 1850 census or some other census to see who grandma, great-grandma, second great-grandma was living next to. Your DNA is not matching up. And sure enough, they find in the 1850 or whatever census, great-great-grandma is living next to the DNA they're now carrying. So this is not all that unusual. Okay. Now, to get the most out of your DNA testing, there's a group you can join which is free. ISOG, the International Society of Genetic Genealogists, they have people that you can hire if you want to look at your DNA and advise you. Oftentimes, adoptee will do this. They cost about $50 an hour. You can join any interest groups. There's Genealogy DNA on RootsWeb. You want to upload your results to GenMatch. You want to post your GenCom. And none of this costs you any more money. You also want to edit your settings in mtDNA so that matches that are low level don't get reported to you, because you're not going to get anything out of them. So you turn those kind of matches off. You want all your surnames listed. You want a beneficiary listed for your DNA. If you get hit by a truck and somebody else in your family is a genealogist, they want to keep testing with the latest test that comes out, they can do that. And you want to join all relevant projects. You want to join surname projects for the Y DNA, whatever that surname was. And I have people with autosomal DNA join my Plunkett project because they have a Plunkett somewhere in their tree. It's not a patrilineal or a matrilineal, but it's somewhere. And so fine, I let them join. And then you want to manage your personal information and account settings and do these various things. If you ultimately test, you can go back and read this and take care of it. You want to list your most distant documented ancestors so that people will match with you, have an idea. Let's see, getting the most out of your surnames. They've got to all be listed, or you're just wasting your money, or better yet, have your GenCom posted. A beneficiary, be sure that you have one of those. You know, it's so sad. I had one person pay for their relatives test, and you always want the oldest person in the generation farthest back tested because they have the least mutations. Well, sure enough, the person died. He didn't leave a beneficiary posted, and if it's not in the will, nobody can get at that DNA anymore. So you want to be sure to take care of that. Joining all the applicable projects. Uploading your GenCom, this tells you how to do that. And now new features, we're going to talk about each one of these. The first one is the linked relationship. In my family, I had my father and my uncle tested. My uncle is on my mother's side of the family. So if somebody matches my DNA and also my father's DNA, it's obvious it's coming from his side of the family. And so you get an icon telling you it's from your father's side. If he matches my uncle as well as myself, it's coming from my mother's side. So by using this linked relationship, you can get more information. You can find out which side of the family this match is coming from. If I had my mother, that would be ideal. She's deceased, then I would definitively know which side, but since she isn't here, I have to use her brother, my uncle. And not all his DNA is matched with me, so I'm going to miss some matches there, but at least get some identified as my mother's side. And now here's another one, how to link relatives to your autosomal test. There are the directions. The linked relationships, you'll notice next to my father at the top, there's a little blue man. And so anyone that's got that little blue man, it says that's on my father's side. Then there's a little pink woman next to my uncle, and anyone is matching on that side. Now the second and third people, that's my brother and sister. Obviously they match on both sides. And then my nephew, he's matching on both sides. So that'll tell you a little more information at mtDNA. And then here you could put notes for each person. I found out that this person and I share 7th grade grandparents. And we're 8th cousins. By the time I sort it all out, I'm not going to remember that the next day. So I write it out, and one by one you can go through each of these and figure out where they're coming from. Now if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, there I have the list of all that person's surnames, and in bold black letters are the ones I'm matching with. Those show up in black. Now I've got my patriot there, Hickman, Dr. Hickman, you'll notice. So that gal and I are both descendants of the patriot, Dr. Hickman. So I might be able to help her join DAR because I have various documentation that could be useful to her, and vice versa. Okay, another thing you get from mtDNA and the other services too, a heat map showing the concentration of people that you match. Now I know that I'm 1/4 Irish and maybe an 1/8 British, so it's not surprising that the British Isles are a big concentration. I also have an ancestor that came from Poland, so you can see a concentration there. I have no idea where Italy and Spain come in. That was kind of a mystery to me, but something I can follow up on. And here in common with, and so what you do here is you can put a check mark in the box on the far left-hand side, and for up to 5 people, and say, who do I have in common with these 5 people? And those are probably going to be lining up on that side of the tree. Chromosome browser. Now with mtDNA, you can look at all of your chromosomes and select people to find out where you match up on the chromosome. This is an adoptee. And you'll notice there's a concentration all on chromosome 2. There's 4 different people lining up on the same side. Maybe I can find a common ancestor for this adoptee with these 4 people. Now the question is, are they matching on the father's side or the mother's side? If those 4 people all match each other, they're matching on the same side. But usually some of them will match each other and the others will match the opposite ones. So they're coming on different sides of the family. So this chromosome browser is another way to help determine who's matching on which side. Now, this is the objective of DNA testing, to make a map of the entire planet showing how we are all related. And if we could get every single person to test, we could actually do this. But we're missing a few people at the moment. Mostly what we've got are Western European people who live US, Canada, Great Britain, and a little bit of Western Europe. We're missing Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, South America. But anyway, this is for the R1b. This is Western Europe. And you see where that green arrow is at the bottom? That's where the Plunketts and Maguires are hanging off of the Western European tree. That's us right down there. So you can trace your relationships with each. this way. And GEDmatch has been used most famously in the newspaper to find that California serial killer, the Golden State Killer or something. And one that they found recently, this was very interesting, he had 2 matches in GEDmatch. They did not match each other, which meant they were on opposite sides of his tree, one his mother's side, on the father's side. So then they hired a genetic genealogist to build out the trees of these 2 matches. And they found out where the intersection of these 2 trees was, and they worked it down to a single family which had 3 daughters and a son. They got lucky there because you wouldn't be able to tell which son had done it. So they excluded the 3 daughters, and they reported the fellow to the police, who then started trailing him. He was driving a truck around, and a cup fell out of the truck. I suppose he was littering. He threw his cup out. The police grabbed the cup, tested it, and sure enough, it matched the DNA of the murderer. So they found him. Now, it's possible to get false positives because all of you sitting in this room are shedding DNA. After we leave this room, they will be able to prove that each one of us was here. If you cough, you might leave a spot of DNA on the wall. If I shake hands with Shelley, I'm going to have her DNA under my fingernails. And if you wash your laundry, your family DNA is all commingled on your clothes. So there's all sorts of DNA that you could get false positives on. And what was in the newspapers recently, there was a horrific murder where the husband and wife were murdered. There are 3 people that broke in, and they found DNA of 3 people, and one on the murder victim, under his fingernails, he had DNA of a homeless alcoholic. And he said, no, I was never at that place. And everyone said, no, that guy couldn't murder anybody. No. But how did his DNA get under the fingernails of the corpse? Well, what they found out, and the guy had a Loctite alibi, he was found passed out on the street by the police and taken in an ambulance to a hospital. And he was in the hospital at the time of the murder. He was signed in. There was no question. They had the guy until the next morning. But that same ambulance took the murder victim to the morgue. And they test your pulse using a little device they put on your finger. They put it on the homeless man as well as the murder victim. And so a person could get unjustly accused with DNA evidence, and we have to be very careful of that. You know, it works both ways. So some people, fearing this, notably African Americans, took their DNA out of GEDmatch, which is unfortunate because it could be used to exonerate you as well. So just a word of the wise, I'm in GEDmatch. I think it's great. We're using it to help adoptees and others. I think it's a great service. And the people who run it, you know, there's no free lunch. They're doing this essentially for free. You can make donations. And I thought, well, they're doing it just to beta test on us, and then once it's proven, they're going to sell it for big bucks to one of the 3 big services. No, they're just 2 little retired guys who are sincere about wanting to help people find their genetic genealogy. So it's very interesting. Okay, the GEDmatch homepage, this shows you the type of things you can do, 1 to many matches. You can check your X chromosome. X chromosome, we're going to find out shortly, is very important who you match on the X chromosome because it reduces the number of places on your chart, your lineage, where that can come from. Here's what a sample GEDmatch looks like. In the far or left-hand column, if it starts with M, you're matching somebody in 23andMe. If it's A, your ancestry. If it's T, it's mtDNA. It tells you how large that match is and whether there's an X match. Now, I did not ask for X matches on this one. That's why that's all zeroed out. but it'll tell you your haplotype. You'll see the H there in the middle column. Those are my relatives. That's Helena, the haplotype for 40% of Western Europe. So that's the type of report you get from GEDmatch. Now, a very important thing about GEDmatch is they have many algorithms for determining your ethnicity. That's often why people test, they're just curious about it. And if you test in 2 different services, you will very likely get different ethnicity percentages. It depends which algorithm they use. There are 15 or more algorithms here. You choose which one. One might be specific for Native Americans, others for Jewish, Western Europe, whatever. They're very different algorithms. Now this is an adoptee that I was helping, and notice where the arrow's pointing, that's Arctic Amarant, that's Native Americans. This one says he is 1.26%. He has French-Canadian heritage. Often they intermarried with Native Americans. So then I ran another algorithm of a GEDmatch to see what he would come up with. And now he's 2.82% Native American. This suggests that he's either got a 3rd or a 4th great-grandparent that was Native American. But each algorithm you run will come up with different results. I know that I'm a quarter Irish, and Dan knows that he's half Norwegian, but I came out with more Northern European, and he came out with more Irish than I did. And it's just the algorithms are not very well referenced yet, and they have to refine them, and they continue to refine them, and you will get different results if you test next month possibly than from your test last month if they reprogram those. Okay, here's another thing to pinpoint your ancestral homeland. If you are from Ireland, Scotland, or Britain, this works very well because people stayed on the land for many generations. This doesn't work if you come from Scandinavia because the name changed every generation. But with this system, you can determine your homeland by finding out where your matches are, and you get a Venn diagram showing one locale where your matches are concentrated. So you can read more about this by going to his URL, and you can buy the Irish book that he put out showing where these different areas are that people can match up to. So I won't go into great detail on that, but if you're looking for an Ireland homeland, this is a good way to find that. The X chromosome matches, as I talked about this, those only are passed on by the mother to her sons and daughters. The sons don't pass it on. And so you can only find this in certain places in your chart. Okay, here is the X pedigree chart for a man. That's the blue in the center. So he cannot get an X chromosome from his father. He got the Y from his father, and that's why he's a man. So you just ignore that part of the chart. Then he got it from his mother, but she only could have gotten it from her mother, and so forth. So by mapping out that X chromosome, you can narrow your searches. And here the women could have gotten their X chromosome either from their mother or their father, and it shows where in the chart that comes from. And Prometheus, this is very interesting. Once you get autosomal test results from mtDNA Ancestry or 23andMe, you can upload it for free to Prometheus. Now, if you wanted to stay on their site, you have to pay $10 because they keep upgrading what they're learning medically, and then you can rerun it. So the type of things it tells you, because Dan and I are of more senior age, we often already know what's wrong with us. For example, it told Dan, you've got high blood pressure. Sure enough, he's been taking pills for that for years. It told me that I am not immune to norovirus, but he is. In the Galapagos, norovirus came aboard our ship. A lot of people got sick. I got sick. He did not. And then it told me that you can be an endurance athlete. Oh, is that why I ride centuries? I can ride 100 miles on a bike, no big deal. You just keep going. What's the athleticism in that? And I skied the Birkbeiner 35 miles, so what? You just keep going. No hand and eye coordination, but I can be an endurance athlete. And my father was a pro football player. I probably got that gene from him. It also told me you have the gene for extreme longevity. I don't know if that's good. My dad is 98 and he's not so good. Dan's mother is 101. I don't know if I want to live that long, but I do have the gene for that. So, okay. It can tell you if you've got the breast cancer gene or not. It tells you a propensity for Alzheimer's, for MS, all kinds of things. It can tell you what kind of drugs you might not be able to use because you're immune to them, that they won't work on you. Now, none of this is 100% true. It could tell you you've got the breast cancer gene and maybe you have something else that cancels it out. You would actually need a medical geneticist to give you a more final analysis. But it's lots of fun to do, and Dan and I have gotten great entertainment from it and learned a few things too along the way. So I highly recommend uploading to this. And this is what you have to sign off that you agree to. Basically, you're signing off that I agree that everything in here can be erroneous. Okay. Now, NSDAR guidelines on DNA testing. DAR does move at a glacial pace, and they have very limited way that they say you can use DNA testing, and they're going to have to change this as they move forward. And they even state that they recognize that this is just their first shot at it, and these guidelines will change. They could be more broad or more restrictive, but here's what they are right now. Okay, it says you have to have at least a 37 marker Y-DNA test and test at least 2 males. Well, that's good. Y-DNA is the best. I'm okay with that. But it says you have to have a 100% match, a 37 marker match. No, in my family we've got 3 mutations. I know exactly where they occurred. I'm not going to get a 100% match, even with my dad's second cousin. Somebody like my husband will get one because they have no mutation. So they really need to back off on this. And if you can identify where that mutation occurred, they should be able to ignore it. All right, the next one, they say you can only use DNA testing to prove a new son of a patriot. What? If it works for a new son of a patriot, it would work for a new grandchild of a patriot or a great-grandchild. And indeed, they've had only one person come in using DNA testing, and they had to waive that rule because the person was trying to prove the link between the patriot's child and grandchild. And so right off the bat, that one flamed out, that it's only going to be used for a new son of a patriot. And we're going to try to use this, Janet, for the one that we're working on. And it would not be even the grandchild of the patriot, but we're going to make new rules here. We're going to try, Janet. We're going to try. Okay, then next, you have to submit direct evidence to the tested male with no other analyses. Well, if you've got another analysis that's a valid analysis, why wouldn't you take it? Okay. And then the patriot and the patriot's place of birth has to be documented. Well, that is anyway. So in order to do this, you would come in through mtDNA with a 37 marker test. You have to find somebody in your lineage who has the name of the patriot, a surname, and then you find somebody in another lineage that is a different child of a patriot that's already proved to DAR satisfaction, and then you show that the two of them are the same. So I'm going to look at Janet's chart there of her person, and we're going to see if we can do this. We'd have a lot of fun doing it. We'll find out here shortly. Okay. Now, DAR does offer a class on DNA testing, an online class you can sign up for $100. and learn more about this. And I've audited the class. It's a good one. And the DAR does accept paternity tests for the first 3 generations, parents, grandparents, for example. They're usually court-ordered. Then Mayflower and SAR have a much more reasonable policy. It's on a case-by-case basis, and they'll take any of these 3 kinds of DNA, and that's really where DAR needs to be, particularly if they want to expand membership. Okay, that's SAR policy. And now suggested reading. You all have a reading list on the last page of your DNA handout that gives more reading than this, but the first 3 are what I consider the best that you really want to start with. Take them in the order that I list them there, and then you can run through the others. It's all fascinating reading. And if you run out of relatives to test, you can test your dog. For $60, you can find out what Fido's heritage is. Some people actually are interested in this, and they've got something for everyone. So there's no end in sight with genetic genealogy. This will keep you going until you get back to Adam and Eve, and Dan and I have an enormous fun with it, and we hope that you will too. I want to thank you all for coming today.